So, Teddy, I have a question. You said that many of the creative and progressist political representatives at municipal level came from the academics. So my question is, do you plan to be the mayor of San Diego one day? And if not...
Yeah, that would be good.
And if not, why?
Well, you know, as we mentioned that Fona and I had the opportunity to be called by the mayor of San Diego, previous to the one that we have now, who was a hugely charismatic Democrat, the first Democrat mayor in decades in San Diego, who happens to be a very conservative city, obviously, San Diego. And so he won the election on the idea that pretty much San Diego had been benefiting only wealthy downtowns out of tax increment laws, you know, where basically all the taxation developed, generated by hotels, luxury condos, and all of that would be benefited only downtown. It wouldn't be distributed in the city at large. So downtowns became bubbles of wealth across the United States. So this mayor said, we have to stop that, and now we have to really pay attention to the communities, not the marginalized communities, and not only that, but reach out to Tijuana, because the future, unlike Trump, the future of the region and the future of San Diego depends on the future of Tijuana, that the destiny of these two cities was intertwined. And so anyway, hugely provocative platform, and so he called us at the university saying, you know, I've heard about your research on the border and on these communities, why don't you come and join me in leading the public space project? You will be the directors of this. So we went, we joined him, but unfortunately he got into a political scandal, and it's better not to talk about that right now, but he was evicted, pushed out of government in a few months. I mean, which also talks about the dysfunction of the city. Anyway, but we were in the middle of that project inside the municipality and gave us a taste of what it would be like.
But, you know, the truth is, now we've had the experience of doing this kind of work from the base of a municipality and from the base of the university. We've also worked with many nonprofits, so we understand how it works to be actually embedded in the community. And the problem is that unless you have a very strong mayor, bureaucratic culture inside of municipalities can be so resistant to this kind of work that unless you have a strong mayor pushing it through, it's very hard to get this kind of stuff done. We had the good fortune of having the agility of a mayor who would point to different departments and say, help them with this, let them do this, let them through, waive that permit, you know, so it became much easier. But we have more agility from the university, truly.
Thank you.
He has way too much in his history. He'll never.
You know, if the right conditions emerged, you know, we would do it. I mean, we have friends who, you know, that even, you know, if Lorenzo Romito in Rome could run for mayor, you know, he did. So we have friends, activists, and practitioners who have in their own settings gone for it. And I think that, but in our own locality, I think the conditions are not there yet. But we have talked about it, and I think that just like Sergio Fajardo, he was in his classroom in the University of Medellin, and he once said, you know, I'm just tired of talking about change. I really want to have a stab at really produce it and really make it happen. And so that day he exited, and he went to engage every single neighborhood of Medellin personally. And he ended up winning the election. You know? But it was this desire to really get to the next step.
I'm Bernard de Cleve. I'm a researcher in the Metrolab and a permanent teacher in the UCL School of Urbanism. My question is, all three spoken about the connection between the academy and the society. Maybe my question will be addressed to most specifically to Mario Dragh. And I think that many of us are engaged as teachers in the learning of design in school. So my question will be very basic about the desynchronization of times. We are all in our objective to get the students out of the school and to organize and include design as as Miodrag said, as a practical, tactical and strategic activity, and including it in the urban culture. But one of the main problems is the desynchronization between the agenda of the learning program in school and the agenda of urban life. So maybe you could share your experience in this
why don't you
point.
start? I begin. Well, yes, that is one of the big problems. It's an enormous challenge. We have semesters that are 15 weeks long. I think you too, right? 15 weeks. So it is really, really difficult to go beyond that. Some students decide to stay involved in projects, and they continue to work with whoever our partners are. And they engage in the work with community organizations, with the city, with municipal organizations. I think you should get another microphone. I don't want to give you the. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I'm maybe way too careful, but better not. There are many ways in which we try to surpass this limitation. One is that we don't work with a partner in one-off fashion. Second is that we don't work with clients. None of the external partners is a client. All of our partners are learning partners. That's how we call them, learning partnerships. Production of new knowledge, right? Exactly as you talked about. So with the community stations, right? So these are long-term partnerships. We sign contracts with them because we have to, as a university, we have to do that. Some of the nonprofits insist on it. And we do repeating it, if not continuously for 3 to 5 years, we at least do it once a year. We try to. Last year I did work with one partner organization, actually 3 partner organizations for a year long, fall and spring, and they want to continue working with us. And students, in fact, some of them, they wanted students to stay involved in working with them over the summer, so after our semester was done. So we came up with a number of different modalities through which we begin to, simply transgress and bypass these limitations you talk about. And there are many other things. I want to give some time to Fona and Teddy, but there are many other ways in which we, in small and large gestures, try to figure out how to do the work that it's simply that resonates, that it's relevant and meaningful. And the key thing is the client model. And in the schools of architecture, that's a predominant model, unfortunately, across the world. That's the key thing. There is, if you have a client-based model, then you have, first of all, to sign a different kind of contract, agreement, the memorandum of agreement with the partner organization, and then you're obliged to deliver whatever it is that they are interested in. Once we reframed it as learning partnerships, which are ongoing, long, open, porous, involve always more organizations and more people, growing number of partners, then it became actually not slightly, but very different experience. For the students who are here, I mean, they can tell you about it, for the students and for us too, of course. Thank you for the question, very, very good.
This idea of long-term partnership is essential. I mean, I think we're both moving very much in the same vein. So students are actually plugging in to projects that are ongoing, and they can find their place within them. Another thing is that the trust relations have already been established. One of the most difficult things about sending students into the world to work in communities is the ethnographic dimension of this, that they have to understand what it means to engage community members. This isn't just us coming and telling them what they should do. And so this is a slow process. We've built long relations of trust with several communities, and we know each other quite well. So there's a fluid flow. But another issue related to the temporal one that you mentioned is that many universities have difficulties seeing this kind of applied work in communities as research. It's seen as service. It's seen in a humanitarian lens. Again, it's this bias of a kind of vertical relationship, now not a research-based one, but a service or humanitarian-based one where the university has all the resources and the community is seen as this sort of empty receptacle waiting to be filled with our good grace. And it's been very hard to get the university out of that mindset that what they're doing is good deeds in the city. Maybe they are, I mean, that it's not bad for institutions to share resources, but there's a problem when this relationship gets in the way of co-production.
And also that gets really to the issue of sort of the structure, the bureaucratic structure in terms of advancement within the university for professors that are as masochistic as all of us, right? Where, again, as I don't know here, but in every university you are measured in 3 categories that are distinct from each other, right? Research, teaching, and service. And our work fuses all of those together, right? And so we are constantly trying to make a case that, again, this is not service, but this actual research, but it's co-produced, and teaching and so on. But I wanted to add just one last piece, which is spatial, the temporal dimension, the kind of bureaucratic structure that needs to be reorganized in order to really, for this work to really be more meaningful. But there is a spatial and a programmatic component. The stations that we are producing, let's say co-producing with our partners, are physical spaces in those neighborhoods. So it's not just the university. They are co-managed, co-curated, and co-produced and co-developed. So these are field hubs where teaching and research is conducted collaboratively. And there are a variety of programs that we have. But one particular program, now we need to be generating new programs. So we found a way to bring into the university some of these community actors, activists, who couldn't be in the university because they don't even have a degree. But their intelligence, their political, social, and economic intelligence is amazing. So we produce a program that we found funding for, which is another thing too, is that we have to really be agile to really produce an economic sustainability model here. But we call it public scholarship program, where we give a substantial stipend for 2 activists every year to come and spend meaningful time with us inside the university, acting as mentors, and actually spending time with us to co-produce the content. Because a lot of these people come from the marginalized communities that we work with, they're always just expected to not only receive the students for free, but also to volunteer, right? So we want to really attach to this process a model of economic sustainability, not only for us, for the university, but for themselves, to increase their capacity. So that has been one of the most fruitful agendas, is that we are trying to bring the community into the university, producing kind of stealth programs that enables them to co-teach with us. And that's gaining traction now.
Can I just add something to, I'm sorry. In addition to this, to Mathieu and Benoit and the framework you have established, which is a very elegant framework, which actually addresses many of the things we talked about now. The challenge with that framework, of course, is that, and we were recently across University Alliance, we're involved in promotion of some younger colleagues. We sit on these committees all the time, as Teddy was saying. So for faculty who are full professors with tenures with them, it's not a problem at all. So you can invent whatever framework you want. Where it really becomes a problem is for younger professors, younger faculty, researchers who are yet to be promoted.
That's right.
That's where it usually doesn't work. And why? Because the committees at which elderly senior professors sit, who usually, not always, not everywhere, but usually are committed to their own more traditional disciplinary work, they will see that work, let me put it this way, they will find real difficulty understanding the value of that work. So the job of making the case for the younger colleagues who do this kind of work and who are engaged in this way of thinking is really difficult, really difficult. I can tell you numerous examples. We have some super happy examples and wonderful. We have some very unhappy examples. Most are actually unhappy. And the faculty from other disciplines were told, literally, I quote, if you didn't waste your time working with the parcels people, you would have tenure. Right? Because the promotion committees have no measurement, have no criteria. They don't understand, going back to the work we're doing here, they don't understand the value of that kind of work.
You know, and it's not just work in communities that universities don't understand. They also don't understand interdisciplinary work because people within particular disciplines don't know how to evaluate it. They don't know how to place it. They can't situate it within their own, you know, they don't know the journals you're publishing in, they don't understand. So it's tough.
Here I'm Julia, PhD student in urbanism. Here. I have a question for Miodrag, but I was thinking about what you were saying on infrastructures, and the examples you were showing us were a way of interpreting infrastructure as a way of basically a way of translating sort of policies to make them more readable and more useful for social movements and social groups acting inside the city. But I was wondering, but then what do you think it is, apart from this process of translation, the role of urban designers to deal with this, not just being, is it just about the process of translation? And then when it comes to a process of really design at the metropolitan scale, so it's not just about punctual things.
I think this is a question for all of us.
What
in fact.
yeah.
We can all answer
No,
this
maybe
question.
because I know more about what they could answer to this, but I have no
Yeah.
idea what you think.
This is a question for all of us.
Thanks.
You want to start? No. So there are many ways to answer this question. It's a very complex question. It's a very good one. I think that, as I said before, I don't propose that any of the types and forms and modalities of work and practice, urban practice I talked about, should directly replace the work of urban planners, urban designers, and the conventional, and that I don't mean that pejoratively at all, the more conventional work on architects, because after all, we do need buildings. We heard, of course, that buildings in Marseille are horrible, mostly, and that is the case, you know, everywhere. And so there is a problem with architecture, but let's not talk about that. So, but I do think that our societies do need professionals. So this work doesn't come at the expense of existing professions. But the question is, if you have, for example, political problems with how your discipline is positioned and out of which, and occupies the grounds out of which you need to act, or you're expected to act, if you have ethical problems with it, your question will be, at some point in your life, what do I do? And then, you know, it's just me. But let alone all the others, let alone the discipline, the field, the needs, people. What am I going to do? How am I going to act? I found my way of acting through education. I'm a professional educator, right? A lot of people would teach because they have fun teaching or they teach to support themselves. So I teach. That's what I do. I'm an educator. But I'm an architect too. The same way is a lot of people, actually there was Victor Papanek, who back in the early 70s wrote that every professional design office should dedicate at least 10% of office time to what he called social causes related work. 1972, 3, whatever that was, right? That idea that professionals engage, that design is not just a formal practice, but it's also a spatial, symbolic and social practice, that idea is not new. And basically, it doesn't also mean, as I told you already in the presentation, it doesn't mean that the people who were engaged in this type of work, they will not design, they will not also act in ways in which the outcome of their work can be recognized more as architecture or as, like the community center that Teddy was showing at the end, right, that you guys showed. That was the, so it's not excluded. But for a lot of young people who are not interested in designing buildings, but still love to study design and designing because of the process, the creative process that it exposes you to, which is invaluable, I hold. They are interested in engaging in the world, in acting in the world, in applying that knowledge, if you will, and that skill and that mindset in other ways. And what has happened to me as a student, and I know that it happened in many places where I also taught and critiqued work, is that people would say, in architecture schools, people would say, why do you call that architecture? That's not architecture. What do you mean? Like, that's not architecture, and would dismiss completely the work of a student. And this is a catastrophe for architecture, not for the student and for the professor, but for architecture. So what I'm trying to suggest is that there are other modalities of work, there are other types and forms of practice, there are other ways of engaging in the world that does not include necessarily the way in which you may engage also in the work that produces outcomes that may be recognized by the society as belonging to a particular discipline. And if you happen to be a licensed urban planner or an architect, you may engage the world also that way. So that's, there are many other things one can say about that, but at least that.
Yeah, if I can just, I think that this would be a good way of summarizing a couple of issues, particularly in the context of hospitality and inclusion, because we rushed it, at least in our presentation towards the end, but we were trying to figure out how do we go beyond the gesture, right? Hospitality is a kind of goodwill gesture of receiving. But as we receive, we incorporate. And as we incorporate, we produce a new sense of praxis where all of us collectively would have to re-engage the city differently. Or the city at least would have to be reorganized or restructured or retrofitted to be more inclusive. So I think this whole idea of translation and infrastructure are mutually inclusive. Because on one hand, we have to eliminate our idea of infrastructure as a top-down model of singularity, just to solve the problem of traffic or this. But we begin to complicate our notions of infrastructure. It has been written a lot about, as a mediating system that basically is differential in nature, meaning it can be flexible. That's the reason we show the image of the train in Bangkok, because after the train goes by, the market goes back into its own place, not to suggest that that's what we should be doing, but the flexibility of an environment to transform from one place to another, from a market into a site, etc. So infrastructure then, our conception of infrastructure is that it mediates the large and the small, the informal, the formal. It is another thing. To get to that, we need to understand and translate the dynamics embedded within those communities or demographics or forces that are really transforming the city in front of our very eyes. So a lot of our work with immigrants in the United States is trying to argue that the negotiation that immigrant communities have, like the neighborhood of San Isidro, with space is extremely creative. They negotiate boundaries, resources, collaborations. They obliterate the private boundary in order to share, a small unit for an extended family. So these negotiations with the space and boundaries are incredible inspirations to transform land use. But who carries that knowledge to the municipality? We would have to translate it and quantify it and understand that we need to maybe increase density ratios, et cetera, et cetera. So that act of translation of that hidden stealth information then produces a new framework of top-down policy and resources to support that intelligence. And then the project becomes physical, because then all of a sudden it's not going to be the typical 5,000 square feet parcel for one house, but it will be a parcel that is intelligent in producing these other types of relations. And finally, the informal settlement itself in Tijuana. Engineers, water, sewer, waste engineers, and architects coming to the informal settlement to solve the problems of they would impose this infrastructure of aqueducts and as their way to solve the problem. But if they came to actually contact the people and they realize how these people are building their own environments incrementally through time, maybe that infrastructure would accommodate that degree of participation, but also of scale and so on. So it begins to transform, right, the physical project of infrastructure into something more flexible, more inclusive and so on. So I think that those two aspects need to be brought together. Thank you. We should end that, no?
Yes,
yeah,
Mathieu is calling her to end, but I will abuse this time.
Yes, do.
Fona, do you want to say something? I just wanted to, because I mentioned Abdulmalik Simon, and I realized that you nodded when I mentioned Simon. I just wanted to end on this, that this notion of infrastructure is very beautiful, very elegant. Of course, it's about people and social bonds, but it's about the fact that he says that what stands between people enables them to do something together. Basically, if there is nothing between them, they won't be able to do anything. But if there is something between them, that thing will determine what they can do. Once they are involved in designing that thing, they will be able to choose the way in which they want to act in the world, in the way in which they want to reorganize their communities. So, I think that's a very powerful thought, and that's why the notion of infrastructure, as Fauna and Teddy also talked about, is not necessarily this essentialist notion of, as Donald Trump said, LaGuardia Airport, we need to do our infrastructure because LaGuardia, it looks like you are in a third world country. So if that's the measure of what infrastructure should look like and what it's supposed to do, then that's the opposite of what we have talked about.
Thank you very much to our speakers. I propose that we applaud them.